What happens when America's sweetheart, Chris Pratt, walks onto a late-night talk show expecting friendly banter about his latest blockbuster, only to find himself facing a host determined to tear him down on live television? Tonight, we dive deep into the explosive confrontation that shocked audiences worldwide and exposed the darker side of Jimmy Kimmel's hosting style. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is the moment when a beloved actor discovered that his host had a secret agenda that had nothing to do with entertainment and everything to do with personal destruction. Before we reveal the shocking details of what really happened behind those studio lights, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us whether you think talk show hosts should stick to entertainment or if they have the right to ambush their guests with personal attacks. The evening started like any other Jimmy Kimmel live taping. Chris Pratt arrived at the studio in his usual good spirits, fresh from the success of his latest Marvel film, and ready to share some behind-the-scenes stories with fans. The audience was buzzing with excitement, phones were already recording, and social media was lighting up with anticipation of seeing the charismatic actor who had won hearts as the lovable Andy Dwyer and conquered Hollywood as Star-Lord. What nobody in that studio audience could have predicted was that Jimmy Kimmel had spent weeks preparing not for an interview, but for what could only be described as a calculated character assassination. From the moment Pratt walked onto that brightly lit stage, something felt off to those who knew how these shows typically operated. The usual warm greeting was replaced with something that felt more like a predator sizing up its prey. Kimmel's smile seemed forced. His body language was tense, and there was an energy in the room that veteran Hollywood insiders would later describe as electric with anticipation, but not the good kind. Pratt, ever the professional and genuinely nice guy that everyone in Hollywood knew him to be, maintained his trademark charm and waved enthusiastically to the audience, who erupted in genuine affection for the actor who had never forgotten his roots. The first few minutes proceeded normally enough, with Kimmel asking standard questions about Pratt's latest film and his experience working with the ensemble cast. Pratt answered with his characteristic humor and humility, sharing funny anecdotes that had the audience laughing and reminded everyone why he was one of the most likable celebrities in entertainment. But those with sharp eyes could see Kimmel's impatience, the way he seemed to be waiting for something, checking his notes more frequently than usual, and giving responses that felt more like he was going through the motions rather than genuinely engaging with his guest. Then came the first red flag, disguised as what seemed like a casual transition. Kimmel brought up Pratt's social media presence, specifically mentioning how the actor had been dealing with online criticism lately. The question seemed innocent enough on the surface, but the way Kimmel phrased it, with a slight smirk, and a tone that suggested he knew something the audience didn't, immediately put Pratt on alert. The actor's media training kicked in, and he deflected gracefully, making a joke about how everyone gets trolled online and how he tries to focus on the positive interactions with fans who appreciate his work. But Kimmel wasn't satisfied with that response. Instead of moving on to safer territory, he doubled down, asking Pratt how he felt about people questioning his political views and whether he thought celebrities should stay out of politics entirely. The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and you could practically see Pratt's mental gears turning as he realized this wasn't going to be the light-hearted promotional interview he had prepared for. The audience, still largely unaware of the undercurrents, continued to be supportive, but backstage, producers were beginning to exchange worried glances. Pratt handled the political question with the same grace he brought to everything else, explaining that he believed in keeping his personal beliefs private and focusing on his craft, rather than using his platform to push agendas. It was a perfectly reasonable response that should have satisfied any professional interviewer, but Kimmel's reaction suggested he had been hoping for something more controversial, something he could sink his teeth into. The host's disappointment was almost palpable, and his next question revealed just how deep this rabbit hole was going to go. What made this situation particularly insidious was the context that the audience wasn't aware of. Pratt had been dealing with organized harassment campaigns from certain political groups who had decided to target him based on assumptions about his beliefs rather than anything he had actually said or done. He had maintained his dignity throughout these attacks, never responding with anger or defensiveness, always taking the high road. But now he was sitting across from someone who seemed determined to relitigate these manufactured controversies on national television, turning what should have been a celebration of his professional achievements into a trial for crimes he had never committed. The studio atmosphere was beginning to shift as perceptive audience members started to pick up on the tension. Pratt's responses remained professional and gracious, but there was a new wariness in his eyes, the look of someone who had walked into what he thought was a friendly gathering, only to discover he was surrounded by people with hidden agendas. Kimmel, meanwhile, was clearly building toward something bigger, his questions becoming more pointed and personal with each exchange, like a prosecutor laying the groundwork for a devastating cross-examination. Kimmel's next move revealed the true extent of his preparation and the malicious intent behind this entire interview. He pulled out his phone, claiming he wanted to show Pratt something that fans had been talking about online. The screen displayed a carefully edited compilation of Pratt's social media posts, taken completely out of context and arranged in a way that painted him as something he absolutely was not. The manipulation was so obvious that even audience members began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that they were witnessing something that crossed the line from entertainment into something much darker and more personal. Pratt's reaction was immediate and visceral. His face went through a series of emotions as he realized the extent of the ambush he had walked into. This wasn't spontaneous or off the cuff. This was premeditated, researched, and designed specifically to humiliate him in front of millions of viewers. The actor who had built his career on being genuine and authentic was now faced with a host who had spent considerable time and effort constructing a false narrative designed to destroy his reputation. The betrayal was written all over his face, not just professional betrayal, but personal betrayal from someone he had considered a colleague in the entertainment industry. When Pratt finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was steel underneath the words. He asked Kimmel directly what he was trying to accomplish by showing doctored social media posts, and whether this was supposed to be entertainment or character assassination. The question cut through the studio like a knife, and for the first time since the interview began, Kimmel seemed momentarily taken aback. He had clearly expected Pratt to either get defensive and angry, which would have made for great television drama, or to crumble under the pressure and provide the kind of viral moment that drives online engagement. What he hadn't expected was for Pratt to call out the manipulation directly and with such calm authority. The host attempted to backtrack, claiming he was just sharing what people were saying online, and that he thought Pratt would want the opportunity to address these concerns. But his explanation fell flat, especially when Pratt pointed out that the compilation Kimmel had shown was clearly edited and manipulated, combining posts from different time periods and removing context in ways that completely changed their meaning. The actor's response was devastating in its simplicity and accuracy, exposing Kimmel's tactics for exactly what they were, while maintaining the moral high ground that had made him so beloved by audiences worldwide. What happened next was something that television historians would later point to as a perfect example of how live television can expose someone's true character in real time. Instead of acknowledging the legitimate criticism of his methods, Kimmel doubled down, suggesting that if Pratt had nothing to hide, he shouldn't be so defensive about people analyzing his social media presence. The logic was so fundamentally flawed and the accusation so baseless that even some of Kimmel's most loyal audience members began to turn against him, realizing they were watching a good man being systematically attacked by someone who was supposed to be entertaining them, not traumatizing his guests. Pratt's response was masterful in its restraint and devastating in its accuracy. He explained that having nothing to hide didn't mean he should have to sit there while someone deliberately misrepresented his words and character for entertainment value. He pointed out that the same editing techniques Kimmel had just used could be applied to anyone's social media history to make them look like anything the editor wanted them to appear to be. The educational moment was lost on Kimmel, who seemed more interested in scoring points than in acknowledging the ethical problems. With his approach, the audience was now clearly divided, with many people audibly expressing their disapproval of Kimmel's tactics. Some were actually calling out questions to Pratt, offering support and encouragement, while others were directing their displeasure at the host whose show they had come to enjoy. The controlled environment that talk shows depend on was beginning to break down as real emotions and genuine reactions replaced the manufactured entertainment that Kimmel had planned. Camera operators continued rolling, knowing they were capturing something unprecedented in late-night television history. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that his ambush was backfiring spectacularly, attempted to regain control by framing his questions as legitimate journalism. He claimed he was just doing what good interviewers do, asking the tough questions that audiences wanted answered. This was the moment that Pratt's famous patience finally reached its limit. Not because he lost his temper, but because he realized he was dealing with someone who was either completely delusional about what journalism actually entails, or was knowingly lying to justify his behavior. Either way, it was clear that this wasn't going to end with any kind of mutual understanding or respectful disagreement. The verbal exchange that followed was unlike anything that had ever been broadcast on Jimmy Kimmel Live. Pratt systematically dismantled every aspect of Kimmel's justification for the ambush, pointing out that real journalists fact-check their sources, provide context for their information, and don't use deliberately misleading editing techniques to create false narratives. He explained that what Kimmel was doing wasn't journalism. It was tabloid sensationalism disguised as legitimate interviewing, and that the difference between the two was something that anyone with basic media literacy should be able to recognize. The education was delivered with surgical precision and devastating effectiveness, leaving Kimmel with no credible response. The breaking point came when Kimmel, clearly frustrated that his carefully planned ambush was being turned against him, made a comment that revealed the true depth of his malice. He suggested that maybe the reason Pratt was so sensitive about online criticism was because deep down, he knew that some of the accusations might be true. The words landed like a physical blow, and the entire studio fell silent as everyone processed what they had just heard. Even by the standards of hostile interviews, this was beyond the pale, a direct accusation with no evidence, no context, and no justification other than the host's apparent desire to cause maximum damage to his guest's reputation and emotional well-being. Pratt sat perfectly still for a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, his expression unreadable but his body language suggesting a man who was processing not just the insult, but the sheer audacity of someone who would make such an accusation on live television. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the studio with crystalline clarity. He said that he had come on the show to talk about his work and connect with fans, not to be slandered by someone whose idea of entertainment was destroying people's reputations based on social media rumors and manipulated content. The response was devastating in its simplicity and undeniable in its truth. Pratt continued, explaining that what Kimmel had just done wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially libelous, and that suggesting someone might be guilty of unspecified wrongdoing without any evidence whatsoever was exactly the kind of behavior that had turned social media into a toxic wasteland where rumors and accusations carried more weight than facts and evidence. The lesson was delivered with the authority of someone who had experienced the real-world consequences of online mob mentality and understood exactly how dangerous and destructive it could be. Kimmel attempted to laugh off the criticism, trying to turn it into a joke, but the audience wasn't having it. Instead of the nervous laughter that typically follows uncomfortable moments on talk shows, there was genuine anger in the room, people openly expressing their disgust with what they had just witnessed. Some audience members were actually standing up and applauding Pratt, while others were shouting their disapproval at Kimmel, creating a chaotic scene that was completely unprecedented in the show's history. The reversal was total and absolute. The hunter had become the hunted, and Kimmel found himself facing exactly the kind of public humiliation he had tried to inflict on his guest. Pratt stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, every gesture radiating the kind of quiet dignity that had made him one of Hollywood's most respected figures. He thanked the audience for their support and apologized that they had been subjected to what he called a disgraceful display of tabloid journalism masquerading as entertainment. Then he delivered the line that would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform, telling Kimmel that real entertainers lift people up rather than tearing them down, and that maybe it was time for him to remember what his job was actually supposed to be about. The audience erupted in sustained applause and cheering as Pratt prepared to leave the stage. Unlike typical celebrity walkouts, this felt more like a victory lap than a retreat, with audience members reaching out to shake his hand, take selfies, and express their support for someone who had just demonstrated incredible grace under pressure. Security personnel surrounded him, not to escort him out as a troublemaker, but to protect him from the chaos that was erupting as the controlled environment of the television studio completely broke down. Kimmel was left standing on his own stage, facing an audience that had clearly chosen sides and had decisively rejected his approach. His attempts to regain control of the situation fell completely flat. His prepared jokes died in the silence that followed Pratt's departure, and for perhaps the first time in his career, he seemed genuinely speechless. The show's producers were frantically signaling for commercial breaks, but the damage was already done, broadcast live to millions of viewers and recorded on hundreds of phones that were already uploading the confrontation to social media platforms around the world. As Pratt reached the studio exit, he turned back one final time, not to face Kimmel, but to address the audience directly. He thanked them for reminding him why he loved performing, why connecting with real people was the most rewarding part of his career, and why treating others with respect and dignity should never be considered optional, especially for those with platforms that reach millions of viewers. His final words were directed not at Kimmel personally, but at the industry as a whole, expressing hope that entertainment could return to its original purpose of bringing joy to people's lives rather than feeding off drama and manufactured controversy. The aftermath in the studio was surreal and uncomfortable. Kimmel attempted to continue with the remaining segments of his show, but his heart clearly wasn't in it, and neither was his audience's attention. Every joke fell flat. Every attempt at humor felt forced and inappropriate after what everyone had just witnessed. It was a masterclass in how quickly public opinion can shift, how audiences will always support authenticity over manipulation, and how someone's true character is revealed not in their prepared remarks, but in how they handle unexpected challenges and pressure. What started as what Kimmel thought would be easy ratings, gold turned into a defining moment that showed the world exactly what kind of person Chris Pratt really was when faced with unfair treatment, and what kind of host Jimmy Kimmel could become when he prioritized personal agenda over professional responsibility. The contrast between the two men's behavior couldn't have been more stark, and the public's reaction left no doubt about who had emerged from this confrontation with their dignity and reputation intact. That's the real story of what happened when Chris Pratt walked off Jimmy Kimmel Live, not because he couldn't handle criticism, but because he refused to participate in his own character assassination at the hands of someone who had forgotten what entertainment was supposed to be about. What do you think about how Pratt handled this situation? Should celebrities have to tolerate ambush interviews just because they're promoting their work? Or do they have the right to walk away when hosts cross the line from entertainment into personal attack? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories that reveal what really happens when the cameras are rolling and the gloves come off.